My name is Brett Trapp. I'm a consultant living in Atlanta, Georgia. On this episode of Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, we are talking all about millennial leadership. What does it look like to lead millennials? How do we exhibit transparency, vulnerability? And we'll also be talking about the least sexy leadership trait. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Barron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Barron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Barron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series, where today we're going to look at being a millennial leader and being able to effectively lead millennials. What it is that you don't get. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular listener, thank you for making us the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 listeners globally. And we also are grateful that Inc.com made us the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. So thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Listen, there are over 1 million podcasts out there, thousands of them dealing with business and leadership, but there's only one show focused on what's at the heart and soul of leadership, and you're tuned into it right here, right now, with me, your host, Dov Barron. Remember, we always need your help in staying relevant, so get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a C-suite leader, whether you're a CEO, sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that in being a leader, it's easy to feel like you're supposed to be something. But what if what you do feels like there's a dichotomy between who you are and who you're supposed to be? Can you face that and compassionately lead someone else while feeling that they have different values than you, whether those are generational, i.e. a boomer set of values versus millennial values, or for that matter, even if they're faith-based values? Some would say it's impossible to lead without having to suppress parts of yourself. But what if being all of who you are, even the contradictory parts, could actually make you a better leader? Would you do it? Well, stay tuned, because you're about to find out what happens when you embrace all of who you are in leadership. Our guest today is Brett Trapp. Brett Trapp is a consultant, writer, speaker. He's previously the Vice President of Client Experience at Boostathon, fun-run and innovative school for fundraising company based out of Atlanta. For over a decade, Brett was a key player in helping Booster raise more than $150 million for American schools. Within Booster, Brett Trapp led a team of creatives that developed high-end character and leadership content for more than 1.3 million students annually. In late 2016, Brett launched Blue Baby Peak, a 44-episode journey through faith, sexuality, shame, loneliness, singleness, and emotional health. Yes, all in the name of leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Brett Trapp.
Thanks, Dom. It's good. Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm excited.
And we're very happy to have you here. So let's jump in at the end for a minute. Blue Baby Pink. Weird title. What the hell is it?
So Blue Baby's Pink was a 44 episode journey through my sort of coming out experience. I'm 35 years old currently, and I am a gay man, but stayed closeted really all the way into my 30s. I grew up in a small conservative town in called Florence, Alabama. My dad was a Southern Baptist preacher. My mom was a teacher. So just did not feel safe really even accepting my sexuality. So just sort of stayed in that closet for many, many years. And so began to progressively come out around 2010 to close friends and family while I was working my job, a very demanding job. Had basically sort of taken the route of workaholism to cope with my internal problems, which is good or bad, depending on how you look at it. There's definitely are worse vices than working too much, but that was my vice of choice. And so about a year ago, wrote this blog basically asking people, hey, I'm going to invite you into this journey of what it's been like being a closeted gay person of faith, of the Christian faith, and tell you what it's been like. Because I had been so holding that so closely to the vest, I never felt comfortable talking about it until I did. And so began to basically publish one blog post per day for 44 days straight. Within a few days, it had a low level of virality that happened, and had thousands of people begin to read the blog, begin to interact, began to send me emails, ask questions, that kind of thing, and really just wanted to approach that story from a very gracious standpoint, not with an angry or finger-pointing standpoint, but just to say, hey, this is the journey I've been on. It's been mostly quiet, but now I'm going to invite you in and let you hear about it. And so did that for 44 days and just told it from start to finish, literally from childhood all the way up to present, and combined a good amount of design, some photography, so that it was really engaging, right, and wanted it to be an interesting experience for the reader.
But it's interesting because, in the intro there, I talked about, and that was when I saw the videos of you and the previous conversation that we'd had before we recorded. One of the things that came up for me was, and it's one of the things I love to talk about, which is the contradictions of humanity. That you've got these contradictions in that you're a Southern Baptist, and you still are, and you're a gay man. Okay, that doesn't juggle very well. And these, as we talked about, certainly less in the millennial generation, but in an older generation, these rules about who you are supposed to be as a leader. You're a leader in an organization. So I think this is something that every one of us in a leadership position has to grasp, is that there's going to be this contradiction between who you actually are and who you, in your brain, who you believe you should be versus the truth of who you are. And I get it from a faith point of view because it's very glaring, right? It's glaring. We see the news where, I can't remember the name of that church who makes me crazy, who, want to burn gay people at the stake and, stupid thing. And they're in the South, which I don't think they actually are a statement of Southern Baptists, but it's that stereotype. That's very obvious and glaring. Okay, you're a Southern Baptist and you're gay. Okay, that's glaring. We can get to that. But there's also this piece around, is it okay to be you and be a leader? Because you must have, like all of us, grown up with a conditioning about what it meant to be a leader. Talk to us about that side of the contradiction more than the sexuality side for a moment.
Yeah, growing up in the American South, I think there are the traditional view of leadership has strong notes of masculinity and how we view masculine men to be and how they should act. And so, I played basketball in high school, played football in high school. In college, I was a part of a fraternity. I was the fraternity president. We won awards and all kinds of things. And so, for me, I actually felt like I overcompensated in an attempt to hide my sexuality. I leaned into the thing that I thought would create the greatest cover story, which for me was leadership. Now, and I don't think that was unauthentic because I love leadership. I think I was born a leader. I have been reading John Maxwell, leadership books since I was 15 years old. And so it wasn't a lie, but it was my best attempt at putting up a smokescreen to keep people off the scent, which is really sad looking back. And to me, it was just a way of life. But having to sort of hide, dodge, create a smokescreen to keep people off the trail, was a really sad place to be. And so once I got into my corporate career, that I just continued that, and I felt like the more I could jump into leadership and portray myself as a leader, the more I could keep that up, which was very exhausting and eventually exhausted me. So,
well, one of the things you talked about just a few moments ago was this this coping mechanism of becoming a workaholic. And for me, it's one of the stereotypical positions of leadership. Is you're not really a leader unless you're putting 80 hours a week in.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's also part of that same thing, right? And so it fit very well as your coping mechanism because it actually perpetuated the stereotype.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that becomes a way to signal our virtue as a leader. The more I work, the more I'm looked up to and that kind of thing, which I think that's evidence of at times a very toxic leadership environment where people feel like I have to portray a certain facade to make the boss and make those around me feel like I'm actually doing a good job instead of actually producing good work that's good for the client and helps the bottom line.
Yeah, I made a video recently and it was called Gary Vaynerchuk Lies.
Oh, wow.
It was titled purposefully. And I said right at the beginning of the video, I'm a Gary Vaynerchuk fan. But the lie is the hustle. The lie is what you think the hustle is, because the hustle isn't about being busy. The hustle is about doing the right things consistently, whatever that is. And I think a lot of people think that the hustle and leadership is about working 80 hours a week and letting everybody know that you're working 80 hours a week. And that is the virtue of a great leader. You see, you can tell I'm a great leader because here I am doing something at 11 o'clock at night. And here I am doing something at 5 o'clock the following morning. And yeah, of course, there are times and situations where that's a necessity. But that's not the statement of high-level entrepreneurship. That's not the statement of even hustle or leadership. But it becomes so, I've said this before, I think it becomes so seductive to lean into that rather than tell your truth. And many, many years ago, one of my mentors talked to me about this, and I clearly didn't get it, and I'll tell you why, because at the time I was a full-blown workaholic. Now, do I work less hours than I did then? No. Where I'm doing them from is a very different place. But one of the things he said was he had a business partner. And he said, we broke up the partnership because we both allotted what it was we were going to do. And I could get it done in about 15 to 20 hours. But my partner felt like they worked much harder because they put in about 60 hours. And so, they came back and said, I don't feel like you're pulling you in. He said, okay, well, let's just swap roles. I'll do what you do, you do what I do. And he goes, okay. And he got that done in about 15 to 20 hours. And he said, because it's about looking busy. And I think we live in a society, not just as leaders, but in a society where people are in busyness rather than in business. As a leader, how do you deal with that with millennials? Because you're at that upper end of the millennials yourself. You've led millennials for many years in working with them. And, one of the things I speak about in my last book, Fiercely Loyal here, was about how to lead millennials and talking about loyalty. And you, in your company, have had millennials there for donkey's years. I mean, literally, the length of a career is 4 years for a millennial, and you've had them 2 careers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think back to the idea of workaholism. For me, it came down to, Brett, are you running towards something or running from something with your work?
Stop. I need everybody to get that. I need everybody to just write that down as a question that should screw with your head enormously. Say it again, please, because I want everybody to get it.
If you find yourself working at a feverish pace, I think it's healthy every now and then to stop and ask yourself, am I running from something or am I running towards something? Because when I look at my career, specifically in my 20s, which were marked by a lot of insecurity, a lot of fear, a lot of hiding, I was running from my own problems, and I was using work as the distracting agent to run from that. Yes. I think the shift of my 30s has been, Brett, what is that vision you're running towards? And like you said, you may still be working just as many hours, but your motivation is different. You're coming at it from a very distinctly different place. And so for me, I often evaluate my own emotional health in that way. Am I running from something or towards something? Bob, I believe there's never been a good leader in the history of leadership that was emotionally unhealthy. I think emotional health precludes good leadership, and I think you can't have one without the other. And so it took me, a decade into my career to begin to figure that out and to think about that. And so for me, before I ever get to the conversation of leadership, I always start with, how is Brett? How am I doing? And it can feel very therapeutic. It can feel very woo-woo to some folks, but I think it's the absolute best question you can ask. And so that's the first conversation I would have with my millennial team. I've led millennials since the 9th grade, with student council. But in my corporate setting, that was a conversation we often were having is, how are we doing emotionally? And that's a very strange place to start for some leaders, but I think it's the best.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's imperative. However, and I want to talk now about, again, this cross-cultural thing, so not just sexuality, but even generational, which is this. If you ask a baby boomer, how are we doing emotionally? They go, I'm fine. I'm kind of pissed off that you even asked me that, but I'm fine. Right. I'm good. I know that within the company, with Booster, you were leading, the majority of your people were millennials. How did that wash on the other side, though, when you would ask that question dealing with even a Gen Xer or a later Gen Xer and a boomer? Because you're going to likely hit that wall of, here's my social conditioning, here's my educational conditioning, which is, I'm a leader, my emotions, my feelings, my being has got nothing to do with my work, and I have to keep it separate. That's the conditioning. How did you deal with that?
Well, I don't think there are huge differences in the generations. I think there are differences in, where people are on the age scale. But, my impression is that, maybe the Gen X or baby boomer generations do seem to keep things closer to the chest. I am just a big believer in transparency and vulnerability. Brené Brown, who's someone that I follow and I'm sure you're familiar with, she uses the phrase excruciating vulnerability. Yeah. And I think weakness is something to show off. It's not something to hide. And I know in some really toxic work environments, that's not okay. It reminds me of a time in my job. I was living in Nashville, Tennessee. I was a new general manager for a company doing sales. And I was not a very good salesperson at the time and was failing. And my numbers were not good. And so our corporate office knew that. So they sent a guy named Jim, a big burly man named Jim. And Jim came up and we met at a little deli. And I was just sort of throwing up on him all the problems I was having and all the insecurities and all the failure. I just felt like a failure. And Jim stopped me and he said, Brett, I want you to know something. Your weakness need not be your undoing. Your weakness need not be your undoing, which is very profound in a work setting because often your weakness will get you fired. Of course. Often your weakness will get you reprimanded. Often your weakness will be used against you by someone else to climb the corporate ladder. And a healthy leadership environment, in my opinion, is one where we're allowed to bring our full humanity to the table. Our good days and our bad days with the full understanding we are not robots. We do not employ robots that are emotionless. People are messy. Lives are messy. And so I'm a big believer in leading millennials. You've got to give them space to be fully human. And there are days and there are times to say, suck it up. We got to get to work today. Yeah. But there are other times where people have had really bad things happen to them. And so my goal as a leader was to create an environment where people felt safe exposing their weaknesses so that we could talk about them. Maybe they need to go to therapy for that. Maybe they just need to have somebody to talk about it with. And so for me, that's another part of leading millennials is just allowing them to have a bad day and for that to be something that can be discussed in a safe way without fear of reprimand.
One of my part of my history, part of my background is in psychology, and one of the things I would often talk to people about is grief. And in grief, I would say, if you look around, you probably know somebody who is in a downer and has been in a downer for 25 years because their partner died. And they go, yeah, everybody knows somebody like that, has been in a downer for years and years and years and years. And I say, why do they never sort of smile or perk up? And they go, I don't know. And I go, because they never fully grieved. So they're constantly in grief. And what I'm hearing you talk about, which I think is, in alignment with that, is that very often what we simply need is a safe space to say it sucks. Whatever it is, it sucks. And to not have sympathy, because that's a waste of time, but to have people around us who have empathy and have compassion and are willing to be there for us and as a soft place to land. Not for us to whinge, whine, and moan and vomit our emotional mess over people, but to genuinely be heard is like, when I talk about that from the stage or I talk about that with companies, I watch mouths fall open. It was like, are you crazy? Like, you want me to listen to this stuff? No, I don't want you to listen. I want you to be empathetically listen. Not to listen and go, oh God, I've got to put up with this, but actually listen and care and watch what happens to the transformation of your organization.
Right.
And that's what I'm hearing from you, and I love. I want to sidestep a moment to something that I was listening to you on one of the videos, and I thought I really want to go to this because I can see something, but I want to hear it from you, right? So when I was a boy, when I was 10 years old, my original inspiration to become a speaker, which I've been doing for more than 30 years, happened when I walked into the living room of my house. Now, I was born in abject poverty in northern England. My mum was a poor Jewish woman. And I walked into this living room. My mum has the TV on and my mum is crying. And she's pushing her glasses up as she's wiping away her tears. And, you know, being the eldest son, I'm very concerned about my mum. And I said, what's the matter, Mum? What's wrong? And, you know, she starts to cry more. And she just points at the TV and she says, he's dead. And I look at the TV screen, and it's not a famous actor or a pop star. It's nobody that I would know as a 10-year-old boy. I don't know who it is. And then I begin to listen, and I hear, I have a dream that one day, still get choked, and the realization that this black man, and for a 10-year-old boy, on the other side of the world, you know, because that's what it seemed like to me, who had no relation to my mother, was not Jewish, was not white, was not poor in the context of what I understood it, could impact my mother. You live in the birthplace of that man, Martin Luther King. Tell us what that's like for, again, a gay guy living in the South, at the birthplace of the civil rights movement and the civil rights leader, in a place that is contradictory to that. How did that impact you? How does that impact you?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. From where I'm sitting at my loft in a little neighborhood called Cabbagetown, which is just a little tiny, historically white working class neighborhood in Atlanta. And I'm looking out my window and I can see the buildings of Old Fourth Ward, that's the neighborhood that MLK was born into. I could leave my front door and be on the doorsteps of his birth home in probably 5 or 10 minutes. And so it is surreal. You know, every day I drive the streets that he drove and that he walked and that he did his work in. And so it's very inspiring. And I think that's one reason I wanted to be down in this part of Atlanta, because there's just an energy here. And Atlanta has many lingering remaining problems, and race is still an issue. For 100 years, people have spoken of two Atlantas, a white Atlanta and an African-American Atlanta. And so, you know, I wanted to be down here to be a part of that reunification, to be a part of sort of, in a very small, insignificant way, to be a part of MLK's dream. And so yeah, you know, there's lots of overlap between racial issues and LGBT issues. I'm always very careful not to compare those two because I think they're very, very different. I've often said the roots are similar, but the fruits are very different. You know, sure. the injustices that African Americans have had to deal with in this country are vastly different and more intense, in my opinion. But you know, there are some similarities in these two movements, and you know, I try to do my part of being a bridge builder. I think, to me, so many leaders or people who start off as leaders have gotten intoxicated with the idea of stoking division, stoking hatred. Hatred gets clicks. Emotion gets clicks. Yeah. You can build a platform off of stoking hatred and division and disunity.
Really? Is that true?
Yeah, believe it or not.
I'm finding a bit of a struggle with that. Is this guy who lives in a big white house who might have done something? I can't remember his name now. But really, I just...
Right. So I think there is a new generation of leaders kind of being raised up right now that think the opposite of that. And this is what I'm trying to lead with: leading with humility, leading with listening, leading with incredible boldness and courage, but leading with a sense of empathy and inclusivity, I think, is what great leaders of the next generation are going to be doing.
You know, that's a fascinating piece, because for me, I believe my thought, not the truth. I believe that we are in a leadership crisis presently, and I'm not talking politically, although that's part of it. I'm talking about generally. I think there's a lot of leaders who are old school, and as you said, stoking the fires of division, and there's a lot of new leaders waiting to come through, but I think it was Richard Feynman who said, for things to change, it doesn't take innovation or even courage. It takes for the old guys to die. Wow. He was a Nobel Prize winning physicist who said that. But the point is that it's that place in between is crisis. The place in between where it is one thing and it needs to become another is a place of crises that, as you said, tears people apart. And it takes enormous courage to break through with that, to be that bridge, if you will, as you talked about, between the division. When we look back, we got all this stuff that's going on contemporarily as we speak about this, about monuments coming down from the South that were related to the Confederacy, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think, and I want to hear from you on this because I know it's an important subject to you, I don't think we truly understand what leadership legacy is. Talk to us about leadership legacy from your point of view.
I think of leadership legacy really in terms of, did I invest in my people? Were they better after being under my care? I've often thought about what a tragedy it is, Dov, that we send people home from work at 5 p.m. on empty. To me, this is a tragedy. And I think, when you study sort of the Industrial Revolution, the early years of American industry, people would come to work and just get beat up, either physically or emotionally, and they go home and they've got nothing left to give. Their tank is empty. And so my goal as a leader, when I was leading a team of 20 millennials, I wanted my people to go home tired but full, exhausted but full, because I want them to walk through the door. I'm a big believer in just the concept of family. And so to me, that's the prime cultural institution. It's not business. I think it's family. And so as a manager, if I can send my people home on full, where they have more left in the tank to give to their wife, their husband, their children, to me, that is a huge win. And so I know that if I'm doing that, if people are going home on full, they're going to look back and say, wow, Brett was a good boss. I always want to be in any leadership environment. I want to be the best boss anyone ever had. I think of my buddy Robert. I think of Ayana, 2 employees that I used to have. I hope when they're 85 years old and someone asks them who's the best boss you had, they think back to this goofy guy from Atlanta, Georgia named Brett, who led them well, who loved them well, and who actually gave a damn about them. Because I think good bosses give a damn about their people, their job, and their families. And those are 3 really, really key things that I always wanted my teams to understand. I don't just care about your job and what you can do for this organization. I care about you as well as a person. And I don't just care about you. I also care about your family, because family plays such a big part in emotional health. Right. And so I wanted people to know that I remembered the name of their spouse. I remember the name of their children. I remember what school their kids go to. So I'm able to have a conversation about that and just be human, because being human is something that in this leadership crisis that you've mentioned, I think that's the missing piece. We've forgotten to be human, and we've gotten so fixated on external metrics that are important, but not the most important.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, in fairness to everybody, I get it, because if you're not reaching the bottom line, if you're not making money, you're not in business. So I get it that you've got to focus on that. And I get the old conditioning that says, you've got to be a leader, and that means you've got to be emotionally separate. But I'm so with you. It's about the humanity. One of the things you spoke of, I mentioned it earlier when I said that, in the company you were able to keep millennials for like 8 years, which is an insane amount of time for a millennial. If anybody does the research, like I said in my book, I talked a lot about it. And you had them there for that long time for great loyalty. But you talked about that in the context of the CEO and his motto about care. Tell us a little bit about that, because I thought that was fabulous and fascinating.
Yeah, so at the company you're mentioning, Booster, where I worked for 12 years, when I started with the organization as a startup, there were 3 employees. We could fit the whole company at a booth at Outback Steakhouse, and then when I left 12 years later, there were over 500 team members, most of whom were millennials.
Right.
And as you mentioned, it's true. Our millennial, people talk about millennials are flighty, and millennials, they want to move from place to place. And I want to say, you've not come to our company.
Right.
Because our millennials are incredibly loyal. I stayed for a decade. I could walk around our home office and point out, oh yeah, he's been here for 8 years. She's been here for 10 years. He's been here for 6 years. We just don't lose people. And I do chalk that up to our boss, a man named Chris Carneal, who was my boss for over a decade and just an absolutely incredible leader. When I look at Chris, a couple of things I see, the consistent things I see being under his sort of tutelage for over a decade. Number one, a obsession with culture. Chris puts culture first. And what I love about Chris's story is Chris built culture and he invested in culture when he could not afford to. The company is doing well now, but in 2008, when the economy crashed, we were struggling. But Chris kept investing in people, whether that's, hey, let's all go have dinner together one night, or hey, I bought you this book to help you grow as a leader. The second thing I noticed about Chris, he believes in you when you don't believe in yourself. And that sounds, Dov, so cliche, but I'm telling you, it is one of the most motivating and incredible things that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
A third thing I see in him is he is a radical learner and he is able to adjust. I can remember giving Chris feedback because he was open to feedback, which a lot of employers are not.
Well,
Chris
that's not true. A lot of them say they are.
They are, but they don't want to hear it when
exactly.
When push comes.
I'm open to your feedback as long as it's positive.
Right. The first level of good leadership is being open to feedback. The second level, which is much more rare, is actually responding and adjusting to feedback. And I can tell you things that I saw Chris do, upgrading his own leadership to be a better leader for our people. But the last thing I really saw in Chris to mention is what I call outrageous care.
Yeah.
And this is something you cannot fake, you cannot manufacture. I'm not even sure you can teach it. But when your boss is someone who genuinely and outrageously cares for you, boy, that makes all the difference. A story I've often told about Chris. My dad passed away in the year 2000 from Lou Gehrig's disease, and he passed away on December 31st of the year 2000. And this was before I started working for my organization, but I mentioned that to Chris one time, my boss, that was the date that he died. The next year, on December 31st, I woke up and looked at my phone, and I had a text message from Chris, and it said, "Hey, buddy, thinking about you. Want you to know your dad would be proud of you."
Wow.
This was a text message from my boss.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is it didn't just happen that one year. It's happened every year since. Chris made a note. He put a invite in his calendar saying this was the anniversary of Brett's dad's death, knowing that would be meaningful to me to have someone remember that. And Dov, like I said earlier, you want to talk about, if you want your people to be loyal, just begin showing them outrageous care, actually caring about them. And for me, that was the difference maker of, I had other opportunities. I could have left the company and made more money, but you don't want to leave a leader like that because
No.
you're not going to find a leader like that anywhere else. And so Chris is a person who's built his entire organization on that ethos. And when the guy or the girl at the top cares, guess what? It trickles down to the vice presidents, to the managers, and to eventually to the front line. And the front line, they will then spill it over to the customer. And so Chris has built a $40 million organization in the most authentic way possible. And it's something I'm very proud to say that I worked under Chris's leadership.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal. And it's interesting because I have this conversation about care with many leaders. And we do a little bit of a questionnaire with them and ask them some questions. And, this is my belief. Again, it's not the truth. This is my belief. I believe that most people who go into a leadership position are decent people. They're good people. And I know the initial motivation for them going in is partially to do with upgrading not only their own life, but the lives of the people that they care about. But as time goes on and the demands get higher, very often leaders, when we ask them, do you care? The answer is always yes. Of course the answer is always yes. What is the evidence of it? Well, that varies enormously. And I was thinking about a leader that I met recently who, when people are struggling financially, he gives them these loans and he makes them super easy for them to pay and helps them out and does things for them and all the rest of it. And also doesn't like people to know about it, right? So it doesn't, so there's no bravado in that. But it's really interesting that he cannot hear any criticism. And it's really fascinating. And I've talked to him about, it's amazing the level of generosity you have with others, but none with yourself. Because if you had generosity with yourself, you could actually hear the criticism and go, oh, I can upgrade, the way you talked about with Chris. It's a fascinating piece. Now, one of the things that I heard you speak about before was Booster's Foundation for Employees. Now, for me, this was a beautiful piece. I mean, I was like, wow, that's something that we need to understand, because one of the things I've talked about in the context of this guy I just spoke about was being there for your people when the feces hits the fan. Because it's easy to be there for them when they're doing a great job and they're all in, and it's easy for you to even superficially be there for them and talk and go, okay, come in my office and we'll have a talk. But there's more. And you talked about Chris doing things in a very different way. Talk to us about this foundation.
Yeah, I think it's a foundation of care. It's a foundation of listening. It's meeting people where they are. I think one observation about that culture as well is it's a place where people are really, really believed in. And this is something that employers, I think, have a hard time with. I had a hard time with it as a manager, but I'll never forget another story about Chris. We had one of our general managers had an issue, I think, out in Texas, where one of our clients' homes had burned down. And so this general manager emails the home office and says, hey, this terrible thing just happened. I want to help them. What should we do? And this is over email, and I'm copied. Chris is copied. And Chris hits reply all, and he says, check with Brett. He'll know what to do.
Wow.
Now, this is a very small thing, but I think most bosses in that unusual circumstance would have quickly jumped in and offered a solution, right? Because bosses are smart. They're bosses for a reason.
Yeah.
But instead of doing that, Chris saw an opportunity to empower me.
Mm-hmm.
So he passed the ball to me and said, in front of other people, Brett will know what to do. You want to talk about empowerment, to know that my boss believes that I have what it takes. And I'm a big believer. The ultimate question every employee has in an organization is, does the boss believe I have what it takes? Because if the boss is micromanaging, if the boss doesn't truly trust the team member, then that is very demoralizing for that person. And the opposite is true. When the boss says, hey, this guy's got it, this girl's got it, that is often the thing that provides that fertilizer, that explosive catalyst to get that employee to begin to own their own leadership ethic. And that's what I think millennials are desperate for. They're desperate for bosses who believe in them. So when I look at Booster, that was happening at all levels of the organization. Because again, I believe there's a reciprocity in leadership. If my boss believes in me and trusts in me, I am going to do that. I'm going to do the exact same thing for those who are under my care. If my boss doesn't believe in me and micromanages, I'm going to reciprocate that right down the org chart. And so this is why I think organizations live and die by the person at the top.
Yeah.
Good organizations, it's usually due to the person at the top, and suffering organizations, it's usually due to the person at the top as well. In sports, we get this, right?
Sure.
If a team is not winning and a team is not performing, we look to the head coach, and that's who we replaced. In football, we don't bark at the offensive coordinator or the defensive coordinator. We talk to the head coach. And so this is true in business as well.
Again, fascinating stuff. So let's dive into that a little bit deeper. What are some, you've just given us some, let's see if there's more. What are some of the tips for leading or managing millennials that you would like to pass on to our audience? What is it that they like, simple, like do this? Like,
Yep.
if you get to bang them on the head with something, what is it you want to bang them on the head with?
Yep. I think number one, give more role clarity than you think they need. Dov, I would often fall into the trap of, well, Robert, I told you this 2 weeks ago. Don't you remember it? People have to hear things more than once. We have to clarify, over-clarify, and revisit. And it is annoying. It is repetitive. It is not even that fun, right? Mm-hmm. But giving young leaders who are insecure, they're new to the workforce, maybe it's their first time job, as the leader, right, we have a blindness because we're so close to the information, the product, the client. We have got to come in and spell out with excruciating clarity exactly what their role is, how they can achieve a win there, and then we've got to revisit that. I think another thing, affirm loudly and affirm often. Affirmation is the freest form of compensation. And it is a form of compensation, right? People are desperate to be affirmed. They're desperate for a pat on the back. They're desperate to know that they did a good job. Mm-hmm. And my mind is blown that we still have bosses, managers, and employees that don't understand this. Because often people are more motivated by affirmation than they are by compensation. And that seems backwards, and everybody is different, has their different sort of levels.
Research backs it up.
Research backs it up. It backs it up. And I also have told managers, group affirmation is mostly worthless. Oftentimes I would get up in front of my team, you guys are great, I'm really proud of you, good job. They don't even hear that because that's just sort of words coming in. What is incredibly powerful is specific, customized affirmation. Hey, Robert, this week you sent this email, fantastic job. I love the way you worded that. Hey, Yana, boy, you did this graphic design project. I've never seen anything that good. I really love the way you the font interacted with the image. Whatever it is. Sure. But being as specific as we can in our affirmation is just incredibly motivating. And then I think the last principle that I've often led with is freak out over the good stuff and never over the bad stuff. I have known a few managers in my time who have explosive tempers, and it's one of the most toxic kind of leader to work for. And I've often said it is as if there is a red button in the room. And when a leader blows up, he hits the red button, and it's like a bomb goes off and everybody dies. Yeah. Because an explosive, temperamental leader is traumatic to employees. Yeah. And you can spend a year investing in your team, but all it takes is that one moment of hitting that red button where you allow yourself to freak out and to belittle someone, to demean someone, and all of your credibility is lost in 1 second. As you know, Dov, trust is quickly lost and slowly earned. And so I often say you have got to train your emotions and discipline yourself that when you feel that urge and that surge of negative emotion, you absolutely swallow it. It is not the time to blow up. It is not the time to reprimand. You can do that later, but in that moment, you do not allow yourself to freak out. Instead, freak out over the good stuff. When you see someone doing something right, let yourself explode with joy. Let yourself explode with positivity so that everybody around sees what makes the boss happy. And if the boss is getting happy about the right things, job performance, sales, whatever it may be, boy, that is a way to create a real execution culture, a culture where people execute at a high level and perform at a high level.
On one of the shows we did on culture, I talked about what does it mean to be a CEO? What does it mean to be a leader? And we talked about the usual stuff, which is strategy and decision making and, hitting the bottom line, hitting the targets, creating the vision, all those kinds of stuff. And then I said, but what does it mean to the people who work for you? And it's a very different question. And the simple answer to the question is this. What it means to the people who work for you is they're trying to work out not how to do their job, that's part of it, but it's not the primary. The primary is how do I keep you happy? That's the primary driver of the worker. Yeah. They're looking at the boss and going, how do I keep you happy? Because if I keep you happy, then I keep my job, I keep my paycheck, my family gets taken care of. And one of the failings of leaders is to actually give evidence of what makes me happy. And right. That's what I'm loving about what you're saying here, is if I give evidence, oh my goodness, Bob, that was fantastic. When you did that, that just rocked my world. That's made my entire freaking day. Bob goes, oh my God, I want to make Dov's day every day. Because I'm never getting canned if I keep making Dov happy. And so many bosses, so many leaders forget that. As you said, they freak out over the bad stuff and they minimize the good. And it's the first rule of conditioning, whether you're conditioning a child or a dog, is reward the behavior you want and minimally address the behavior you don't want.
That's it.
But it's so basic.
Yeah, it's so basic.
And that's why I love what you're saying, is like freak out about the good stuff. And if you, and I'm all in favor of emotional intelligence, and I'm not in favor of stuffing anything down, if you are about to explode, fantastic. Just don't do it on that person.
That's it.
Please do it. Don't repress it. Go write in your journal, close the door, write in your journal, and go that, and put it all on paper. Vomit into your journal.
That's it.
Right? And then when you finish vomiting into the journal and you've got a little more sanity, then you can come back, call that person into your office and have a sane conversation.
Yeah.
But I love what you're saying there.
That's it. Dov, I think you're referencing what may be the least sexy leadership trait, which is restraint.
Yes.
Restraint. And the higher you go in leadership, the more you have to exhibit incredible restraint, right? Whether that someone makes a terrible mistake. Oftentimes, if you've been in an organization for 10 or 20 years, new team members come in and they will have very bad ideas. They will say an idea that you discussed and debated and failed with 10 years ago. And they're eager about it because they think it's a good idea. It's a bad idea. And your instinct is to squash that idea as quickly as you can,
right.
which is the worst thing you can do, because that will demoralize that person. So again, training yourself to show incredible restraint, incredible temperance, I think is sort of an upper level leadership skill that most people never get to.
But again, that's high level emotional intelligence. And I don't think that enough leaders really grasp the value of that. Tell us, Brett, because we've all struggled. Tell us about a time when you failed miserably and what you learned from it.
Well, I referenced it earlier, but I think my time in Nashville, Tennessee, I moved up there in the third year of my career to be a general manager for our company. I was launching a new area, leading a team, doing sales, facilitating our fundraising program in schools all over Middle Tennessee. And bottom line was I failed. Because I was a people person, I thought I would be good at sales, and I really was just not. And I felt like a failure. I lost my confidence. I became very insecure. I'm looking around the org chart at my lateral peers, and boy, they're having all kinds of success, which is making me feel even worse. So I think that was the moment where I had to really ask, Brett, what is your gifting? What is your calling? And, what does this look like in the future? Thankfully, I had good leaders, and I eventually got a call in the midst of the financial meltdown. My boss in Atlanta called me and said, Brett, there's good news and bad news. The bad news is you're not being successful at your job, and we're going to shut down your entire team, which was not something I wanted to hear.
No.
But the good news is I want you to move to Atlanta and be kind of our head of marketing. And so that was sort of my rock bottom moment. And I moved to Atlanta with no confidence, felt very defeated. But over time, inch by inch, I fought to get that confidence back. And I fought to prove to myself that I had what it takes to be successful in a better seat on the bus. I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of, being in the right seat on the bus. Boy, that is it. And for me, my entire 20s was just about understanding, Brett, where is your seat? Yeah. How do you fit into this thing called business? Because once you figure that out, boy, everything changes. And for me, that was a pivotal moment.
My work is about finding and operating from a place of soul purpose in myself. And for me, the soul of leadership is the people. It is the commitment to their self-discovery, what drives them at a deep conscious and unconscious level in order to reconcile the disenfranchised and even compartmentalized parts of the self. Some of those that I lead, some of those that I coach and mentor and guide, they see it as something else. The soul of leadership might be for them influence. It might be something else. What do you see as the soul of leadership? What is it at its base level?
Gosh, I think that's a tough question to answer. I think the cerebral side of me says producing results. I think that's at the end of the day, if you're If you're just loving and caring about your team, but results aren't there, I think you're a failure. But on the emotional EQ side of me, I say caring deeply about your people, investing in them to the point of transformation. Because the reality is people will spend more time in their office than they will with their family. And so I come at it from the essence of, it is a civic good. It is a cultural, there's a cultural beneficence of investing in, developing in, and believing in your people. Because again, imagine if every workplace in America or across the world had this ethos of we're going to care about people, we're going to look out for what's best for them, but we're also going to balance that with producing results. So I would say, the essence, the ethos of leadership is some sort of weird fusion of investing in people, developing people, and also producing results.
Well, but it's interesting because for me, it's not a contradiction because you just gave us the best example of it, which is here are you working for this company and failing miserably because you're on the wrong seat on the bus. But the leadership is smart enough to recognize you're the right person to have on the bus, but they're willing to invest in you and believe in you and have faith in you to put you in the right seat on the bus so that you can produce. And I think that this is part of the challenge is that we go, this person's crap rather than this person's crap at this, but this person's spectacular. So how do we make them show spectacular in another position? And I think that so often we judge people on the results and the results are not contextual with who they are. And because I've got an idea, I think you'll be great in this. Yeah, but not. I had a conversation with one of my mentors the other week and he said, well, you just, here's one of the things you could just do. Why don't you just do this and this and this? And I went, because that scares the shit out of me and I'm really uncomfortable with it. And he says, and he just looks at me and he goes, really? You? And I said, yeah, I've never felt comfortable in any way, shape or form doing that. It's really uncomfortable. And he goes, you just seem to be the most natural person in the world with that. And I go, yeah, that's the problem we all have as leaders. We look at somebody, we make an assessment, and we say, this is where you're going to be great. You talked about being a people person. Of course, you'll be fabulous at sales. No.
Nope. Yeah.
But, and I think that's a powerful thing for all leaders to get. Yes, you need to see the great in people. Yes, you need to see people's potential. But potential is a complete, total waste of time if that person doesn't want to fulfill that potential. If that's not their natural propensity. And actually being willing to find out, to invest in time, energy, and effort in that person to find out what is the gold within them. Not the gold you see, but what the vein, the gold that runs through their veins. Not as in the facade, but the truth of who they are. That's an extraordinary leader, and that's clearly what happened in the situation you're discussing, and I think it's really wonderful. We're getting close to the end of the program, and I want to ask you this because I believe this with all my heart. I believe that we live in a society that condemns obsession, and some of that for good reason. But in my experience of doing what I've been doing for 30 odd years, I have found that the most successful people in the world are freaking obsessed. Now, what they're obsessed with might be a bit different than what other people are obsessed with. But in order to raise to the level that you have, to become the kind of successful guy that you have, to create what you've created, you've had to be obsessed about something. What would you say is Brett's obsession?
I think my obsession has been getting to know myself, which feels very sort of opaque and maybe even silly to some people. But I am convinced we all live in a vastly complex biological machine called our body. and we have a brain. And I think most people live and die and they never know themselves. Dov, I am relentless in documenting observations about myself. I have notebooks filled with lists of my weaknesses. I have notebooks filled with lists of my strengths. And that may seem bizarre. That may seem narcissistic to some people. But again, I look at life as I'm on an 80-year journey to figure myself out and then to repurpose that to give back to the world and to add value to somebody somewhere out there. And so I just think a lot of self-introspection, a lot of self-inspection, a lot of feedback gathering. I can't tell you how many painful conversations I had with my team, individual team members, to say, hey, give me feedback. What can I do better? It's one of the scariest questions a leader can ask. I hated asking that question because I knew they would shoot me straight and be honest. But oftentimes the things that are most painful are the things that reap the greatest rewards. And so I would say that's been my obsession, because I'm convinced that once you get obsessed about that, figuring yourself out, I think then you can deploy your skills, strengths, and talents to change the world and make it a better place. And when you do that, oftentimes the market will reward you financially.
I'm so on that with you. But, there's a little proviso I want to have everybody get. And that you said, you would ask them, how can I do better? How can I be a better leader? And that you knew that they would shoot straight. But most leaders have not set that environment up. So they will ask, tell me where I could be a better leader. And they go, you're doing a great job, boss. You're fabulous. Because they've set up an environment that is not emotionally safe to actually give that feedback. So there's a step before that, which is, have you created an environment where it's actually safe for people to do that? And clearly, if you were getting people shooting straight at you, that was what you were doing. So my final question to you as we finish up here is this. You've done a lot of interviews now. You've been, your podcast has gone pretty viral. The Blue Babies Pink blog cycle has gone viral. You've done very, very well. What's the one question people don't ask you that you wish they would?
That's a good question. I think I would like people to ask me, in the throes of my loneliness and anxiety from being a closeted man, how did I manage to be professionally successful? Because I mentioned earlier, I think that emotional health is the key to leadership. And I would say there were times when I was not emotionally healthy, but managed to lead in a good way, not a great way, but in a good way. And so to me, that would be an interesting question to answer.
So I'm going to put you on that. So what's the answer?
For me, the answer is one word, and that's community.
Community.
I think our generation, specifically the millennials, are starved for community. I have been a person who's been very blessed to surround myself with really great people, honest people, vulnerable people, encouraging people. It is so cliche. We've heard it 1,000 times. We are the sum of the 5 people we hang out with the most, Absolutely. But it is just so true. And so I think in my darkest, loneliest, most anxiety-ridden times of life, what got me through and what kept me balanced and kept me full was just having really good friends to walk alongside me through the ups and downs of life. And again, that seems cliche, but I'm convinced it was my key for surviving those dark times.
Fabulous, my man. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure and honor to have you here. You've shared nuggets that have been beautiful. Please tell our audience, our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you, what it is you do, and potentially engaging with you.
So you can find my story at bluebabiespink.com, and it's all there. There's also a podcast of the same content, the links from that site as well. And then if you want to find more about me and my consulting work, bretttrapp.com. That's BRETTTRAPP.com.
Thank you so much, Brett. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your openness, your vulnerability, and your willingness to share, which I think has been extraordinarily valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dov. My pleasure.
And I want to say to you, dear listener, as always, please don't just listen to this in the background. Go back, listen a couple of times. I guarantee you there's nuggets you missed. I mean, I took notes as we were speaking because there's so much just real diamonds in here. And I encourage you to go back, listen, and take action on what it is that you've learned today from Brett. It's been a real pleasure. And I want to say to you, dear listener, remember that the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing the most successful companies is somewhat counterintuitive, and that the fastest growing companies often hit a point where they realize they're spending a fortune attracting, training, and developing amazing people, but having them leave them at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in training and developing of your talent only to have them leave you before you can get that return on investment, come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle, amplify the hidden loyalty inside of your company by tapping into your sole purpose of your individuals, of the leaders, and of the organization itself. And we can help you reduce that turnover in as little as 120 days. It's phenomenal. FullMontyLeadership.com, providing you with the concrete leadership skills you need to get you to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. Always remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's $197 value. It's absolutely free to use, so get it at matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. Till next time, this is Dov Baron at fullmontyleadership.com saying, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can be a little more open, a little more caring, and a little more transparent. Care deeply by listening carefully. Until next time, this is Dov Baron. I am out.